As I'm recording this, I've just got back from this year's Salute, which is the largest independent wargaming event in Europe. Typically, it's been a huge landmark on the calendar for wargamers, with either one or both feet outside the Games Workshop bubble, but increasingly I'd say it's fostering links with those whose main games and systems are things like 40k, Age of Sigmar and the Old World. In this video, I'm going to pick out some of the amazing games and tables on display that really caught my attention. Some familiar names in the hobby who were involved in various ways with the event, the usual show report stuff of what I picked up, but also revisit some themes I've discussed on the channel around things like links between Old World, GW mainline games, other settings and historical games, and community building. Timestamps, as usual, are below. First, a few tables. The sheer quality and scale of the terrain and figures on display always amazes me at these shows. I'm a bit obsessive about terrain, and particularly the fully sculpted tables that are sadly a rarity in fantasy and sci-fi these days, outside of more esoteric systems like Mordheim and Necromunda. One to shout out was this astonishing table that I've been following the development of for a while. It's a recreation of the fortified town of Gadara as it looked in the 15th century. The model of the town itself measures some 2.4 by 3.6 metres, and was sculpted from scratch by Oshiro Models, who did updates on the project on their website, that I've linked below, where they also sell a lovely range of buildings and terrain pieces for games set in Japan, China, medieval Europe and sci-fi worlds and others. This was all part of something called the Gadara Model Gaming Project that was a collaboration between academics at the universities of Edinburgh and Urbino, and it went on to win Best Presented Game at the show this year. I'm sure many of my audience will be familiar with Luke Fellows from Geek Gaming Scenics, formerly known on YouTube as Luke's APS. On show were three of the tables that he created and documented on his channel for World War II games using bolt action, themed around the exploits of Easy Company from the 101st Airborne Division, as dramatised in Band of Brothers. Duncan, who commissioned the tables, was running a participation game, as he does at several shows in the UK, so anyone can come along and play some bolt action on these pieces, all in aid of the National Kidney Foundation. I've put a link to his Just Giving page in the description as well. I'll come back to a few more games in a moment, but all this talk of bolt action and Luke's terrain and so on is a nice link to another point about the show, which is to emphasise just how many of the people involved in the show, whether as speakers on panels or as traders selling their wares or as sculptors of figures, designers of rules and so on, were these heroes of the hobby, if you like, of whom many, I'm sure in my main, Old World audience will definitely be aware. People like Duncan Rhodes, Chris Peach and Louise Sugden, all fantastic painters who previously presented painting guides for GW, but each left to start independent careers with Duncan Rhodes Painting Academy, Peachy Tips and Rogue Hobbies respectively. They were all there. Alessio Cavatore, legendary rules writer who wrote the 7th edition fantasy rules, along with Middle-earth strategy battle game, and who I believe oversaw rules development in all of GW's three main systems from, 2004 until I'm not sure when, before going on to write Kings of War and Bolt Action, was in a number of the panels they did. Some of the team from Tabletop Tactics were there, who've branched out from 40k battle reports to cover the Old World recently as well. I managed to say hi briefly to Rob Symes, who runs The Honest Wargamer, and of course the Square-based podcast, which is a fantastic show for anyone into Old World stuff. The Titan Owners Club put on a display game of Adeptus Titanicus at 28mm scale with the full-sized Forge World Titans, which is kind of crazy to behold for anyone who knows how much those cost, and how long it takes to paint them. Many of the people who were at GW at the time the Old World harkens back to are also now primarily active in these sectors of the hobby to which Salute really caters. Alan and Michael Perry, who sculpted many of the figures from that time, switched their focus to their line of historicals figures, Perry Miniatures, which graced many of the tables there. There are games played using the rule set Valour and Fortitude. It's a fairly recent system that the Perrys have sort of linked to their figure ranges through their free downloads on their website, and that were written by Jervis Johnson, who was obviously of huge importance to GW over something like 40 years, and who was the head of the specialist design studio until he left the company a few years back, which is the team that are responsible for the Old World. Companies like Warlord Games were there, prominently, founded by John Stallard, who held various senior roles at GW in that time, and where Paul Sawyer, former editor of White Dwarf, also works now. It's the company that published, again, that aforementioned rule set, Bolt Action, as well as rules like Black Powder, written again by Jervis Johnson and Rick Priestley, another titan of rules writing at GW. And shows like this are where those kind of discontinued cult classic games of GW's past now live on. So Mordheim, although it wasn't there this year, has been featured in previous shows as well. So whether or not it's something that's necessarily advertised within the GW sphere, there's this vibrant landscape in the hobby that I think it's important for old world people to at least be kind of knowledgeable of, for all the reasons to do with community building that I mentioned in my reflections on the first game video. Link in the top corner. Plenty of the people there, like me, would have played Fantasy around 5th, 6th, 7th, even 8th edition before moving into other parts of the hobby, as I did with Napoleonics, meaning it's somewhere that big display old world games would have a mass appeal and draw more people to the system, potentially. You might find something there as well that piques your interest that you want to explore outside of GW's orbit. As a rank and flank game with some pseudo-historical figure sculpts and plenty of areas of rule and game design overlap with other systems, about which I am still intending to make a load of videos but haven't got around to yet, I'd wager it's more likely than not that you will find something of interest there from another part of the hobby. Which links back to some other games that grabbed my interest. Flying with the Titans Owners Club for biggest game of the show was Ken Riley's Jutland project on, I think it was a 32 by 8 foot table, which is immense to see. It was really nice to chat to Ken as well, as a long-time fan of his Yarkshire Gamer podcast that celebrates the type of old-school, large-scale historical war games of which I'm really fond. Link again in the description. The game I spent the most time at was a 15mm refight of part of the Battle of Waterloo, using Dave Brown's newly updated General d'Armée 2 rule set, for which I ended up commanding part of the Prussian right wing. Napoleonics, as I said, are definitely my main area of interest in the hobby, beyond even that of the old world, and I've been keen to try out GDA for a while, having played bits of Black Powder mostly, so it was a treat to have a go with the author there. Last of the few games I'm going to discuss, and the most unusual by far, was a refight of the Battle of Gross Saxon in the Baden Uprising of 1849. It was really the history that appealed here. The 1848-49 revolutions in Germany have significant overlap with the research I did for my PhD, and it's something I've never seen wargamed before. This one was put on by the Continental War Society. So, between the many other games I haven't had time to photograph or talk about, there will be something unusual that grabs your interest. Another good reason for going, let's not pretend, is to see products in person and buy things from a huge range of manufacturers, all in the same place at the same time, without the cost of shipping for heavy or bulky things, which, in a hobby involving metal figures, miniature cases, resin buildings, other bulky bits of terrain, isn't to be sniffed at. So, as is customary for these types of videos, here's a rundown of the various things I picked up at Salute. So here are this year's main freebies, a figure of a pirate. This one is called Storming Annie, the Pirate Queen, and it's sculpted by Bad Squiddo Games. Lovely metal figure. This one with the Salute 51 tag down here, and a custom dice as well with Salute 51 in the place of the 6. There is always a kind of dice and a figure, so just compared to previous years sorts of things. This was the one for 50. The previous year's Salute. This was sculpted by Warlord Games. It was kind of showing off their new printing, resin kind of formula. I think a lot of people had sort of said, ooh, that resin's all flexy, bendy, not too fond of it, and that I think just to give people a chance to experience it themselves, they printed this figure off. It's a kind of Viking, things around gold, because it was the 50th one, obviously, it was in the Jubilee. And you get things like the 50th dice, which is actually a really nice one. It's this kind of grey one with Roman numerals on it. It's just a generic one with Salute and so on. So you end up with loads of these things from each year. And of course the show leaflet brochure programme, which will have some articles in it on things like the history of the Wargaming show, a guide on painting the figure, various adverts for companies that were there, painting guide, and then nice article on Napoleonic gaming, and so on, rundown of previous years' painting competitions and so on. As for things that I picked up this year, first was something that I'd had my eye on for a while, and knowing that this company is a sponsor of the show, it seemed like a good time to pick it up without paying for shipping. KR Multicase are one of the various kind of foam manufacturers for miniature transport, and they're a company I've used for quite a long time. They operate off these cardboard box systems, so this is about yay deep. This is what they call 1 KRU, or 1 KR unit, and Inside the box you can stack it with various combinations of different foam trays. Some that are what are called core trays that are just generic sizes, and some that are specific contours for various figure shapes. I'm sure fantasy sci-fi people will be familiar with these. This is going to be for my dwarf project because I haven't really got a good way of transporting them at the moment. And my old GW plastic trays are all rather... So I've got 8 sheets like this, which are the right height for a single dwarf, and then you can obviously cut through to make it double height for things like standards and so on. And I have, on a previous set I'd used for Nurgle, some pick and pluck deeper ones that I can use for gyrocopter as well, and so on if I need that in the future. So that's probably the largest single thing I picked up. Because this, like I said, it shows it's always cheaper to get it without shipping and so on. Next, some figures. I have quite a backlog at the moment actually, so with all the dwarves I'm working on, so I didn't pick up any figures besides this one set of Wargames Atlantic's Prussian reservists. I haven't shown my Prussians on the channel at this point, but I've been slowly working on 1813 pre-armistice army of Prussians, in which the reservists feature relatively highly, and I had one set of these already because I wasn't sure if I'd like the sculpts too much, but when they're all ranked up nice and closely they look rather good. So I picked up another box of these so that I will have at least 3 battalions now. You get 60 in a set, which for £25 is really good value actually. The way they do that is they don't have a sprue for the command figures, so things like a standard bearer, if you choose to have one in the unit, as well as an officer, a musician, an NCO and so on, you would provide those from another manufacturer. So typically I use Perrys for everything else in the army, so I'd get some metal Perry reservist command to use with this as well. But so a box of those was the only figures I picked up. Mostly it was terrain this year. With the boards being finished and having space in the flat to play games now, it seemed right. So Debris of War. This is a pack of resin wall pieces. This was quite good value actually. It's £16 for all of this, which is easily enough to fence off one whole field, or to keep separately and use for lining roads and things, which I will kind of decide as we go how much space I have and how much I need. But one of those, and similar from Renedra, which is a plastics moulding company. They actually do all the moulds and the casting for Perry figures as well. Some wattle fences, which cover a great kind of span of time periods in historical gaming. You can use these from everything from kind of Dark Ages and then into Middle Ages all the way up into kind of Napoleonics. They wouldn't look too out of place in fields. So just some versatile bits for the battlefield to make things a bit more interesting than a plain bit of green. Other bits of terrain. I came across this company, which I hadn't seen anything from before, called War Painter Scenics. And normally I would be an advocate for making your own fields. There are ways you can do this with things like caulking or plaster and a scraper tool, or you can use, I've seen people using the insert from corrugated cardboard, which they coat with something, or they might use corduroy, the fabric, and paint over that. This was only £8 and it's already cut to size and based on hardboard and painted and dry brush, and it has flock around the edge, so that was a nice win. I thought, I get that. And I am a little short on trees as well, so from the same company I picked up some of these rather nice kind of orchardy trees with various flower colours. So there's some yellows, there's one purple, one white and 2 red in here. So there's caught my eye. And one larger tree. You'll see the kind of tendency towards bulky purchases where shipping would be a nuisance. Anyway, so that's everything for terrain. Some walls, some fences, field, and some trees. I took part in quite a long section of General d'Armée 2, which is a Napoleonic rule set, very recently updated from edition 1 to 2. published by Reiswitz Press, which is a subsidiary group of Two Fat Lardies, who people may be familiar from rule sets like Sharp Practice, but this is a large battle Napoleonic rule set that is aimed at either 15 or 28mm figures. So this is a lovely rule set. It's got lots of full colour pictures of various people's collections actually in them, and 2 laminated inserts for quick play kind of reference sheets for the rules, which is quite useful. There are various books of scenarios for it as well, and the predecessor rule set to General d'Armée was a system called General de Brigade, which itself went through several editions and was again published by Dave Brown. This new rule set had some assistance from his son, who's a maths graduate, I understand, and has kind of revamped some of the dice mechanics around statistical kind of probabilities and things, which make it a bit more interesting to play. But there's various different manufacturers' figures and photos in here as well. I noticed some of the Perry's tables somewhere in here. These are definitely Perry figures and their tables. With some Prussians by the looks of it. Those are reservists and those are some Jaeger, I believe. Oh yes, they are Prussian, because that's the Silesian flag up there of the Line Regiment. And so on. So this was a nice pickup, and I will, I'm sure, put some of this stuff on the channel soon. And this last one was a bit of a surprise kind of random find. I hadn't intended to get any more uniform books, but then came across this pair from Liliana and Fred Funken, which is one that I've known about and had my eye on for a while, but couldn't track down too easily. And together they were going for a fairly reasonable price, actually, so I picked those up. They're not going to be the primary uniform references I have for the period. There's a huge number of books on these things you might be aware of, so there's stuff like, everything from tiny little Osprey guides like this, which will just go through a small number of units with a few plates and sometimes accurate descriptions of what they're wearing. More specific books to certain armies, so I've got these guides to the Prussian army by Stephen Summerfield, which are very useful and have a lot of historical detail, right up to far more difficult to find books like Rousselot's entire Guide to Napoleon's Army, which is quite a weighty, large book, but this is absolutely fantastic and brilliant for the period I'm specifically interested in, which is a kind of 1813 campaign. But these ones are in a slightly kind of older style, and they have some lovely imagery in them of those uniform plates. This covers quite a large as well, which my other ones are much more specific to individual forces and units and so on. But also they have quite detailed plates for different uniforms, pieces of equipment and so on for French and French allies and Prussians and Austrians and Russians and so on. So this was a rather nice surprise find as well. So that is everything that I picked up at Salute. So there's my after show report of sorts. The cross-pollination between historical, fantasy, sci-fi gaming is something I keep coming back to on this channel and something I'm really passionate about. So it would be great to get out to a few more shows like this over the year and kind of report on what's there. Anyway, good luck with all your hobbying, and until next time.